Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 3rd. So, yeah. We are now past the April 1st, April Fool's Day nonsense, of which there wasn't that much, so we don't really have to deal with it, which is a good thing. I'm glad that the internet has pretty much, at least as far as video gamers are concerned, given up on that silliness. Inherently, one of the things about April Fools I don't think people probably rant enough about is that you can make a joke without it having to be on the April 1st. So if you had a great idea for a joke, if it came to you naturally, just a stroke of genius as far as a hey, we're going to make a silly trailer for a game that's never going to come out, you could do it at any point and you would get much more attention than doing it on April Fool's Day, when people are just inherently going to be overwhelmed with dumb jokes. Like, honestly, you wouldn't want to make a joke on April 1st if you were thinking it through and trying to get the best reception there. So, yeah. But also, being businesses and making promises that you have no intention on delivering, or which is pretty much every single April Fool's Day joke around video games, is that you're showing a trailer or announcing some game that is not actually going to be made, has always been wrapped in more negativity than positively, because there just is going to be a percentage of people that actually want to see that game come out. So inherently, if you are going to make a joke, it probably has to be a final product, like either a free demo of a game or something like that, or a free skin of a game. And yeah, we don't really see a lot of those. So I'm still, for the catch-up section here today, I'm gonna probably try and make this fairly short. I'm still in the middle of the next couple of weeks taking extra time doing non-YouTube stuff, so I'm not really focusing on making YouTube content, and so I'm really have just been playing on my Steam Deck. And what's weird about that is that I got the Steam Deck, and while I'm loving it for the most part, there is still a lot of work that could be improved upon as far as the desktop mode, and the button, the X button still is sticky, and I really haven't played any games on it at all. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done to just make it happen, like make it a better system. I knew when I got my Nintendo Switch, in contrast to the Steam Deck, that I wasn't really going to play that much video games with it. That's definitely a reason why when I got my Nintendo Switch, I waited until it was very, very much late in its cycle, because I knew I was just going to play a few Nintendo first-party games, and I wasn't going to make it part of my whole gaming schedule and lifestyle. Was the Steam Deck, in contrast, I think will, or I would like to see it at least, cross over into that realm of being a product for much more gameplay. But I'm not sure how much of that it really will, once I am back to just making several hours of pre-recorded content on my main gaming PC. There's definitely a case where I could do something like The Binding of Isaac, the Rebirth, and just playing that over and over and over again and doing hours and hours of runs on my Steam Deck, but that wouldn't be making any real footage. So yeah, that's mostly what I've been playing with the Steam Deck. I've haphazardly, I am trying to wrap up the beginnings of ideas and projects. I'm trying to do a lot more. Send in a feature request instead of trying to fix it myself. If it's reasonable that I'm only going to spend a day or two on a product or on a program, I might consider doing the programming it or tweaking it myself, or at least making an example before submitting a feature request. But I want somebody else inherently to take the time up and oops, no, this is gonna be bad. Best case scenario is I destroy that card. I was able to turn it around there. Yeah. Yeah, and inherently I don't want to own some program and have to be in charge of it and have my lackluster focus and lackluster skills as far as being specialized in any one kind of programming be the main point of contact on things. For instance, I want the plugin for Kodi, K-O-D-I, which is a media streaming software, to work with a over-the-air DVR called Tableau. Now, there was a plugin that worked for a very old version of Kodi that used Python version 2. They've shifted over to Python version 3, I'd say a couple years ago, and that created a fairly large breaking point for a significant amount of Python-based programs on Linux and elsewhere, and Python was pretty prominent as far as programming and programs that use Python in some level. So yeah, there was small problems with the Tableau plugin just from shifting from Python 2 to Python 3, as far as just you can look up online the solution to these small problems as far as the beginnings of it, and without really touching the actual code. It's just you, at the beginning of a Python program, if you are importing anything, you import different modules. The way you find the files to import in Python 3 is slightly different. So that is a broader issue and problem that has very abundant, easy to search, easy to Google solutions. Google and DuckDuckGo have just increasingly gotten worse and worse, by the way, so it is getting much more difficult to fix or find information. Particularly, I've noticed this about KDE Plasma, is that there's just no documentation to a detailed level of their operating system. It seems like it is basically brand new and very underdocumented. And that is a great example of, if you are going to have an open source project, you need those better angels out there that may not have a lot of technological understanding, but do have a decent amount of documentation skill, where they can make websites to explain what things do and why. Why things are where they are. Just like, where's the location of files, and what do they do, and what functions are available, and what commands are available. there's a real lack of that. And it honestly makes a much better argument that SteamOS really should probably be running on a Debian-based operating system, which has just way more support, way more user bases. The immutability factor of Arch Linux, which KDE is built on, KDE Plasma is built on, seemed to be really the main focus of Valve, above everything else, is that they just didn't want somebody getting into the operating system and either installing cheats or messing up the operating system. And they've installed a barely customizable but functional operating system as an in KDE Plasma as an after effect. Yeah, one of the things that sucks about the desktop mode that they kind of could have fixed, like there's the right way to fix this problem, and then there's a way that you can hard code to sort of fix it. It's not really a great fix. Exists. The problem itself, I should start by describing the problem, is that when you go into desktop mode, it blocks up your mouse and touchpad as the Steam client loads in your profiles and hardware. And inherently it's a problem onefold of the fact that the Steam client is a very resource heavy application that in desktop mode, since you've already opted out of the gaming mode, which by default you're going to boot into anyways, you probably aren't going to want by default to have the Steam client open. You would instead want it to be closed to free up RAM and other resources, CPU. But they have programmed it, and you have to effectively root the operating system to unprogram it to stop the Steam client from loading. And even if you get past that annoyance of it wasting a bunch of resources, I'm pretty sure it also is double updating effectively, because when you first power on the system, it's updating the gaming mode version, and then when you open the client, it's updating the desktop version of the client. But yeah, on top of that, though, it is just not necessary for it to unload the profile and in any noticeable amount of time have the mouse stop working as it loads in the other profiles. That really is just a coding error. That there's clearly too many things happening in between those two steps, when that really shouldn't be the case. Now, I've seen when working with like ESP32s, there can be some hardware calls that will slow down the process when you try and connect and enable Wi-Fi. But even at that, the delay shouldn't be that high, and that's for Wi-Fi and just unoptimized drivers on Wi-Fi. There really is no reason why the hardware calls should be that slow for the touchpads, effectively, because it wouldn't even be the on-screen keyboard element, because that's all software. It would have to be that they are loading in a different kind of driver, a different kind of profile for the touchpads and the other button placements. I did talk about in the last stream about the idea of why there is only one USB-C plug on the Steam Deck. Inside of it, according to LSUSB, which is a Linux way of seeing some information as far as what USB hubs are connected, which are really the USB devices. Inside of it, there is a main fast transfer USB 3.0 hub, and then there are 3 other slower USB 2.0 hubs. The second device is reported as the Steam Deck itself, so that would probably be the controller and the hardware and the buttons. The first device, I assume, is the USB-C plug on the top, and giving that higher priority might be useful if you were going to have to boot off of it or something. Plug in a USB bootable drive. And then the other 2 hubs seem to do very little, if nothing at all. What I think is in there, but because each one of those is a hub, they theoretically should have at least 2, 3, or 4 or more lanes in which you could connect things. But it might make some sense to have data in parallel and not all on the same hub, because there's probably some shared bandwidth happening per hub, and so you wouldn't get full transmission speed if you had 2 devices on the same hub. But yeah, on the other 2, I suspect what is directly connected to those are internal small flash memory chips that that would be used to control and carry boot ROMs and BIOS information, things like that. Not a lot of space, I imagine. I'd be surprised if there's even 16 gigabytes between these 2 spots. So yeah, it may very well be the case that there isn't really seemingly a lot of extra hubs to have another USB port built in, which is fine. I guess it would be wasteful to have an extra hub and it not actually do anything. But I do kind of question if there isn't a good argument for extra hubs. At a certain level, I wouldn't be upset if they invented a way in which you could put micro SD cards on top of each other. They probably would get a little warm if you did that, but yeah. Come to think of it, that is kind of crazy that they haven't invented a standard like that yet, where if you took your regular micro SD card and you stacked 2 of them on top of each other and you had connectors on both sides, then you would have a USB-C like reversible device plug that could be twice as thick, and you could put 2 different things in it. What you probably would want to do is just have cheap adapters that would let you switch 2 into being 1. But yeah, that would work really well. Then you would not really be adding a port, you would just be changing it to be twice as thick. And then you could have 2 micro SD cards, which on the Steam Deck I definitely could see. I have to actually play here. Did I click the wrong thing? May have. can't do anything more. Oh, I feel like I'm not warming up today, but actually falling asleep. Yeah, that's a smart idea, frankly. They need to come out with a micro SD standard where it's 2 micro SDs on top of each other so that the metal pieces are poking out on both sides, top and bottom, and then you could have twice the capacity, twice the bandwidth if it's connected as one device. You probably would want some kind of middle spacer adapter of some sort, but they can figure that out. But yeah, particularly on the Steam Deck though, I could see having one 512 gigabyte micro SD of just ROMs and old games, which I haven't done anything with that really yet. And then you could have one full of music and videos easily. And it would still probably be cheaper to have 2 512 gigabytes of movies and videos than it would be to have one terabyte of micro SD, although maybe not nowadays. Yeah, it probably never was actually cheaper to do that, but yeah, the price per gigabyte issue is still a consideration. Right, I'm gonna have basically one chance here to win, and then I probably should just surrender. Stupidly, as far as what I've been wasting my time on the Steam Deck with, though, I really have not been doing a good job of sticking with some of the projects that I initially started with. If I run into some trouble, I'm very ADD about it and just kind of give up, or have this subconscious desire and want to give up. So as far as the idea of adjusting the uninstaller so that it can leave shortcuts, I've worked on that, but I'm struggling to find the code. I think I finally found a GitHub listing, and that's part of the problem with KDE Plasma in particular, is its GitHub is just not very prominent as far as Google searches and DuckDuckGo searches are going. It's that I would have expected to be able to find more code and find more stuff in the searches. So the idea of uninstalling applications but still having an icon so that you can go back and remember it, I made some small progress on it. Although the first thing I should have fixed, and I've not been working on, is the idea of adjusting where Windows in the keyboard goes. So there still are many occasions as I'm doing other things where I am struggling to resize Windows so that the Steam keyboard is not just over and on top of them. I don't know if I finished any of the stories there. Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the Tableau plugin for Kodi. That was one thing I did do, but didn't actually get anywhere other than to get it to launch without error, but still run into errors and not actually work. And really, it's just the beginning of a code rewrite. And so I was able to submit that code, but the problem with submitting that code is the 1.0 version of it, where I'm calling this the 2.0 version of it because there's such a big change there, was worked on like 8 years ago, and I know for a fact Tableau has since been acquired by a different company, and they're changing really their focus, in that it's either third or fourth generation, the newest generations of Tableaus are building devices designed to have streaming fast channels, free ad-supported television channels, and have commercials in it, whereas the old versions of Tableau were designed to be just over-the-air DVRs, and you were paying a subscription annually to get the channel guide data and extra features, which the extra features were very nice, but perhaps not worth what you were paying for them. They're getting rid of the subscription model in favor of getting kickbacks for airing the fast channels. Although on the other hand, having the fast channels integrated means that the newer versions of Tableaus offer a lot more in a lot more regions, whereas a lot of people on the newest generation, a lot of people on the older generations would be limited by just what TV channels they could access from over-the-air antennas, which are increasingly going to become useless in the United States in particular, because there's just ATSC 3.0 nonsense happening. And yeah, so me updating to end a long story there, me updating the code probably means nobody will ever actually act on that code, but whatever. I spent a day on it, I learned some things, and so it was a nice little learning exercise that probably I should have lower prioritized in favor of actually accomplishing things. So yeah, did I work on anything else? Little things. That's definitely what's going on, is I'm just bouncing around ADD like, and not really focusing on anything, any one thing, and just trying to get a general feel of how usable as a computer the Steam Deck really would work. And in reality, it's usable if you don't use a computer, which is the vast majority of people. It's not usable if you're a gaming PC player, or if you're a programmer, or anything like that. It is a teenager's computer, or family's second computer, but it isn't gonna really compete compared to a $1,000 gaming PC that just has Windows on it and just allows you to configure a bunch of things and change a bunch of things. The one thing everybody hates Windows about is that it just has too many settings and that too many things can go wrong and get changed on it. Well, that's the one thing that Linux normally would be better about, but in this case, because it's so locked down, the SteamOS Linux is actually worse about that. So you have instead a version of Linux that is more locked down than Windows is in the bad ways, and less customizable than Windows in the good ways. So it's the worst of both worlds, SteamOS is at the moment. For most people, you're not going to really customize things, so it doesn't really matter. But when you do want to customize something, you would like the option to be available there. And in most Linuxes, you can do that without having to root your system. And, well, most systems are just by default rooted. Let's be honest there. But you typically don't have to root your system and then be worried about the next update, which is what the real worry is that the next update will undo your changes. Not all of it is Valve's fault. I think a lot of it probably is Valve's fault, but not all of it. Let's see, if I was to do this and then this. Probably shouldn't activate that one because it's not going to do anything. Now if I was to try to do something here, I still couldn't do anything. Can I win? Is the question in this turn. One turn kill. Yes, I can. Yeah, I definitely think KDE Plasma settings are wrong for the Steam Deck in particular, and that there needs to be a real break there from what I imagine they were thinking people would run this on laptops and PCs, and thus having changes needed to be made to adjust to a 1280 by 800 resolution screen is just not something that they were thinking about. But honestly, it's something that they should be thinking about now, because KDE Plasma now is effectively in the big leagues with the Steam Deck, assuming the Steam Deck continues to get sales and doesn't just peter off. There is very much a case where most people at this point won't know anybody that even has a Steam Deck, and it's not going to be sold in stores and things like that. So, or at least not yet. So it is a lot of YouTubers, which I guess I have to include myself in that group this time, that are talking about it more than real people. But compared to random Linux fans who would install a version of Linux, KDE Plasma is definitely in the big leagues now, and will have to recognize that the move is probably to double down on the Steam Deck side of things and really just think of KDE Plasma as first and foremost being the chosen operating system for a Steam Deck. Okay. And I could see it going the other way, certainly. I could see KDE Plasma going, no, we're not going to put in special effort or energy to support this one piece of hardware. We're going to just make our operating system be what it planned on being originally. But inherently, every desktop operating system or theme or flavor you put on top of Linux is all just trying to compete in a slightly different way with something like Ubuntu or Debian, if you're willing to go for stability over flashiness, or Linux Mint if you want something slightly fancier based on Debian. It is kind of crazy that Linux Mint isn't the operating system that they would have gone for the Steam Deck. And frankly, there's only so much progress you can make around something like Ubuntu. Yes, a lot of people talked about it, and yes, it's been made slightly user-friendly. It's perhaps gotten too user-friendly now, and the community is hostile against it, but it's not like Ubuntu as an operating system has massively succeeded. The number of user computers where a human is actually using it, that are using Ubuntu, is still probably in the 3% mark at most. Vast majority of people are using either Linux or, not Linux, either Windows for the vast majority of the time, or Mac OS, which is also based off of BSD, which is somewhat close to Linux, but not the same thing. BSD is based off Unix, and Linux is roughly, I think, originally based off Unix. Android and iOS on cell phones are the majority of Linux. I assume iOS is based off of BSD, actually, if I was to guess. The Android, though, by far has been the most successful Linux operating system, and it's done that by not really being a Linux operating system in any real meaningful way, instead having its own operating system built on top of it. That runs its own packages and applications. And that fresh break certainly, I think, was a major point of success for Android, is that nobody came into using an Android phone thinking that they could install their own Linux program and package and make it actually work. And notably, cell phones introduced a new piece of hardware that a laptop or a desktop PC just wouldn't have, in that they had cellular modems, and they were much more Wi-Fi and Bluetooth centric, whereas Wi-Fi, cellular modems, and Bluetooth were just not really hardware devices of any real concern on a laptop. Wi-Fi maybe on a laptop, up until those points. And that's the slice. I think what a Steam Deck may succeed too is that it is introducing something physical and something desirable in its touchpads, which, notice I'm saying touchpads first, where I would have said buttons first before. By last week I would have said the buttons and the controllers and the analog stick were much more important, but really the touchpads, having now used them for even a week or so, it is pretty obvious that they are the important and helpful element that's been added. Without the touchpads and controllers, the Steam Deck is just a tablet, and it could still certainly succeed as a very powerful tablet, but I think it definitely succeeds way better. Having at least the touchpads. is something to the idea of something like the open framework, where if the framework PC could be squeezed into the form factor of the Steam Deck, you could then potentially take their idea of swappable attachments and swap out the analog sticks and the controllers. That as an idea is appealing, at least. Okay. So I guess what I want to do here, probably just summon this here. Just gonna see this all the way through, I guess. How come this effect works? But yeah, I've spent 40 minutes here talking about the Steam Deck and not really talking about playing any games on it. Which maybe might point to, if I wasn't such a nerd and into Linux and computer programming, that I may very well contrastly have just played a little bit of games on it at most and not done anything else. Yeah. And my experience for the next couple of weeks is mostly having me sit in a waiting room and just commuting. So when I'm driving, obviously I can't be playing a Steam Deck while driving, not legally and certainly not safely. And sitting in the waiting room is actually only about 30 minutes or so, so it is not this massively long amount of time where you would get a good gaming session in. And notably, I am in a waiting room, so the music is all muted. The speakers on the Steam Deck, I will say, sound amazingly good. Better than what you get on a cell phone speaker, just because the speakers are separated out. I did buy a rubber coating case. I may very well opt to replace that case fairly quickly. But yeah, the rubber coating gives you more of a bumpy texture on the hand grips and just gives me the feeling of a little bit more protection, so that if I dropped it now, if I dropped the Steam Deck on the floor, on the hard floor before, I probably would have just scratched up the plastic sides on it, more than likely. Yeah, but it is a fairly expensive device to have the OLED version in particular, so it does make some sense to just protect it with a case. But yeah, the rubber case I got just stretches and squeezes over it, and it still fits in the carrying case that came with the Steam Deck. I think they could probably save some money and reduce the price a little bit by not selling it with a carry case, but then it probably is saving them more to give away a free case than it costs to make the case, in just people returning broken, scratched, and dented Steam Decks. The price point, I do feel like they should try to get it downward, but honestly, if Valve just leaves the price point the same and waits long enough, even the Nintendo Switch 2 will be at that same price point anyways. Do I have anything important to say? Have I said anything important yet? No, I don't really think I do. Plus, we still want to make these streams shorter. So, we have some major stories that caught my eye. Consumers were mostly playing older games in 2023, a report suggests. Newzoo data indicates 60% of the playtime went to 6-year-old or older games. It's interesting that 6 years is the cross point, because you could pretty much write this headline in any different way. It could say 5-year-old or older games, you could say 7-year-old or older games, and then you would just get a slightly different percentage point. One assumes here that 60% to 6-year-old games means that they asked several different ranges, and the numbers of 5 to brand new games equal to 40% in total. 2023 was a very bad year for actual games. It arguably is a great reason to sell the Steam Deck for that reason too. But yeah, there just wasn't a lot of well-received games or games that just came out anyways. 2024 is not looking like it's going to be really much better either. Increasingly, the gaming industry was, and still is, focused on manipulating and increasing its shareholder profits and its stock prices more than they are about being in touch with gamers and what gamers want. Like, the fanboyism around gamers still exists, and enthusiasm around buying new games that are interesting still exists. I think when you look at games like Stellar Blade, you have kind of proof of that, is that if people are interested, people are still interested in playing video games, at least on a surface level if you catch their attention. Meanwhile, you look at Nintendo's releases in total contrast, and it's just a whole bunch of re-releases of old games, and Princess Peach Showtime, which I finally did see the completionist of all people review that game, since so many other people really aren't having anything to say about it, and he said it was mediocre and not particularly good enough. I'm a little shocked by the fact that it's full price. But yeah. Old games are the way to go, and I can't even name a game that I'm super enthusiastic around. I do want to see Stellar Blade succeed, but when I start to think about what games do I want to play if money was no object, if time was no object, it's Nier Automata, really, is what I would like to play. Or Automata is the right way to pronounce it. But yeah. And I don't even think it's just 2023 that's the problem. There has just been an increasing amount of suck, for lack of a better term, that has been creeping into video games for years, and hopefully this doesn't lead to just a full-on failure of the game industry. But yeah, there's a lack of willingness to experiment and a lack of willingness to do anything different, and increasingly it's just created bland video game after bland video game, whereas particularly PC games, but video games in general, were highly experimental, and if one sucked, other people wouldn't just copy that sucky aspect. They would go and make something different. I personally would blame Microsoft, the original Xbox in particular, for causing the beginnings of that problem, and that problem just has slowly grown and grown and grown. But yeah, the massive success of Halo led to way too much of a focus of making game engines that are first-person shooters, and the way too much of a focus making on game engines making first-person shooters has led to way too many games having first-person shooting as its default game mechanic. Where, in contrast, Super Mario Bros. 3 was a massive success, but you didn't then see every single video game after Super Mario Bros. 3 become a clone of Super Mario Bros. 3. A lot of that is the shift to controllers. Certainly, you wouldn't make a game like Halo if you were playing mouse and keyboard and didn't have a controller, or if you were playing on an NES style controller. And even Halo is inspired by GoldenEye 64 and its massive success, so Nintendo might really bear more of the blame. But a lot of that is also just the audience. The audience responded to what they wanted, and to some level have gotten what they wanted. But it definitely feels like an attempt amongst game developers in particular to once again abandon its audience in favor of trying to find what is probably a non-existent fictional audience that is bigger. Video games, in a weird way, kind of hate their customers. At least they come off as hating their customers and thinking that there's going to be another customer base. And I'm sure that's not unique to just video games as an industry. I imagine most McDonald's hate their customers too, but you're not going to get billionaires to eat at McDonald's ever, so you have to accommodate your customers, and video games sometimes feel like they don't want to really do that. Sea of Thieves, I think, is kind of a great example of that, and the other Pirates games, is that feels like very much those are games that the internal game developers loved, and they did or ignored a massive amount of researching and market data and pushed through the development of those pirate games when I just don't think there's that big of an audience. Moving on, Ubisoft, it has a forward, which this feels like this is the first time Ubisoft has ever tried to make a direct announcement, but it's set for June 10th. They have this weird broken circle, Ubisoft Type O, live from LA. Be interesting, I suppose, if Ubisoft announced something that would inherently catch people's attention, but I question heavily if there would be a way to do that. If anything, I think it might just be as likely that Ubisoft is going to make very generic announcements about yet another Assassin's Creed game. That is almost certainly what I would expect would happen. This was kind of shocking. DeviantArt creators, DeviantArt promoting themselves on X/Twitter, have apparently sold over 2.2 million pieces of art from January to March of 2024, which really goes to show, in my mind, how small the audience is for DeviantArt. And it feeds certainly into my current feelings that the internet has really failed to grow in the right way. There are very much websites like Google to search, and no other real competitor to Google search other than maybe Bing. And so effectively Google becomes a cancer of a website. It's just too big. Then you have Amazon.com for basically every single type of purchasing, instead of having more selection, more competition. But yeah, obviously DeviantArt being a place where it is art for a small niche of fans was always going to be a niche website. But yeah, 2.2 million, they're saying it like it's a big deal, when in reality, in my mind, it's kind of a shockingly low number. Although in fairness, DeviantArt is not really a website that feels like it is designed for monetization of your art and content as much as it feels like it's a place to post free art and promote yourself in other ways. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a significantly larger amount than 2.2 million that has been sent via Patreon to the artist to just support the artist. It is still a focus of DeviantArt as far as AI art, and so they are still very much promoting themselves in that way around an AI art generator, smack in the face of what all the human artists want to see happen. If there was a video game that said in 1 month they had sold $2.2 million, that almost certainly would be considered a pathetically small amount of money. Not something that you would say out loud and celebrate. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says that Unity is sunsetting the Ziva tools amid an ongoing company reset. I don't know what Ziva is though, so I need to know that first. Ziva Video FX, Ziva Real-Time, Ziva Face Trainer, and related Ziva products. I have no idea what Ziva is, which probably means that it wasn't being used by many people. Meanwhile, anytime I talk about Unity, all I think is, boy do I hope that the Godot engine becomes better supported and more popular. And in fairness, the Godot engine so far hasn't looked like it has massively updated its software and its code. It needs a massive influx of cash, and it needs to hire more programmers to be 24/7 maintainer style programmers. It also needs a massive amount, being an open source project, of people willing to contribute code who are not being paid. And that's one of the problems with open source programs, whether it's Linux or otherwise, is that there's often a lot of people who want to just do their own thing and don't want to work with other people. And since programming requires a lot of collaboration, it can very much be a struggle to get people working together or get people on the same page. I think that's good enough for today as far as playing ranked. We are now at 100 with 18 days left. I guess I could say that I finally have uninstalled the Star Trek Lower Decks game on my phone. After sticking with it for way too long, I'm just tired of wasting my time on it and not really getting any kind of rewarding gameplay from it, since it was a particularly bad game. I also have been dropping the ball on playing Memento Mori and getting all the daily rewards because I've been messing with the Steam Deck too much. This is an interesting headline from Video Games Chronicle. Apparently the Tekken boss says that he thinks younger players prefer team games so they can shift responsibility if they lose. This is Katsuhiro Harada saying that one-on-one fighting games need to change. Now, inherently, I might be outside the norm here, but if I'm playing a single player one player game, if I lose, it doesn't really feel bad to me. Like, I don't feel devastated or even slightly upset when I lose. But I definitely have to admit that there were and have always been little kids who've played video games and thrown fits when they lost the game and want to blame other people. And I guess at a certain level that mentality probably is not fully matured out of older kids. Some percentage of older kids at least. So yeah, but I would hope when you're talking 16, 17, 18-year-olds, people who would typically be playing games like Tekken, if not much older than 18, you would hope that they were a more mature group, at least enough that they aren't just trying to subconsciously or consciously blame others every time there is a failure. There is certainly a lot of toxic voice chat that's talked about like that, where you have players blaming the newbie or blaming somebody else when they really are dropping the ball. Inherently, that is why I don't like playing online with other players in any form factor, is that there is the feeling that the option is just too high for people who feel like they're pros at games and they're not giving newbies time to get better, or they're just trying to shift the blame. So it's an interesting thought that probably is being way too localized as an idea, because, well, thousands of years, hundreds of years before video games ever existed, yes, there were definitely people who were blaming other people for their own mistakes. Inherently, there's obviously going to be some witch hunts out there where somebody makes a mistake and ruins their crops because they didn't water the crops or feed the crops correctly, or they overfarmed the crops, and instead of blaming themselves, they just say their neighbor is a witch and they put a curse on them, and then you have a whole witch trial type thing. If this statement, which is probably a nothing statement, was to be taken seriously, I don't know how you make a fighting game where it is team-based. You could certainly do that. You could have 4 players where 3 players are sitting around doing nothing, or you could have 4 players all fighting 4 other players at the same time, or even 2 players fighting 2 players at the same time. But most of that would just be a lot of weirdness and getting worse netcode reactions and responses so that you could just manipulate the numbers. The bigger problem that I think should be recognized around fighting games is that the win ratio is just too darn close to 50% if it's a fair game. It's probably much lower than that in a lot of fighting games where it's not a fair game and you're playing against very skilled competitors who are just better at playing the games and have much more experience. But even in the best case scenario, your win ratio is going to be 50% on a 1 versus 1 fighting game. Whereas playing a single player game, I may not die even once in a single player game. My win ratio would be 100% in that case. But even if I did die once per hour, if I played for 60 hours, you would basically, let's make the math easier. Let's say I played a game for 50 hours. I died once. So let's say that one death is considered a failure. Then that is a 49-to-1 ratio of hours in which I didn't die, and those would be considered victories. So you're talking a 98% win ratio in that case, if I did the math right. Yeah, that's much higher than 50%. Now, I don't know how you really do that in a fighting game without throwing in a bunch of bots, and that's probably just what you should do, is that you should just have a bunch of bots. But once you start to get to tournament level play in any kind of fighting game, even if it was 2 versus 2, your win ratio is still going to be about 50% in the best case scenario. And you can have it where other people blame other people all you want, but that doesn't fix anything. It just allows bad players to blame other bad players. You've got to either increase the win ratio, which is very difficult in a fighting game, or you've got to make losing feel like you aren't losing as much. That instead of losing, you're learning, or you're earning, or you're gaining something. Throw in some kind of RPG mechanic where you're getting stronger, or you're getting gold on every loss. That's what we see in Yu-Gi-Oh! For instance, where every loss still gives you a few gems, which still gives you a few cards, which lets you effectively level up your decks if you put in the effort to make you get better, to win more. In most fighting games, a loss is probably not going to get you anything. The only thing that would really have a shop would be something like Mortal Kombat, and I don't think you're really grinding out coins on Mortal Kombat or any other fighting game. And if you did get some kind of currency, you would then have to use that currency to upgrade your character to make them punch harder or in some other way succeed. And then it would be fairly pay to win in fighting games, which might make more money for fighting games and might help keep fighting games around. But yeah, the fighting game concept is, I think, that they are, I think the fighting game concept itself is just kind of always going to be this niche style of gaming. I don't know a great way to bring in people into playing fighting games without also ruining what a fighting game is. Inherently, this is him saying younger players like to play Fortnite instead of fighting games, is really what he's making reference without actually mentioning Fortnite. And if you were to try and compare Taken and Fortnite, it's just completely different types of games, so it would be an apples to oranges comparison. But yeah, fighting games inherently are niche, and they are becoming a smaller niche. Young kids like to play Fortnite because their friends are there. Their friends wouldn't be playing a fighting game. And Fortnite does have some added aspects that make it kid-friendly, as far as it was available on iPhones when kids first got into them. And it does have a appeal designed, the visual appeal designed to target kids, particularly with the Fortnite Lego skins, whereas fighting games have always been more targeting people, males in their mid-20s, effectively. And so, if they were going to target younger kids and make a fighting game, still probably wouldn't work, because I don't think parents want their kids playing a straight up here's a punching and kicking game versus Fortnite where here's a running and gunning game, because particularly in America, parents don't care if kids shoot guns in video games in any way, but punching and kicking is a very doable thing for almost any child in America. So anything that would emulate punching and kicking would be considered more violent than shooting somebody with a gun in the minds of a lot of parents, even though that is obviously completely backwards. Moving on. Video Games Chronicle says a fan-made Bloodborne cart will get a rebrand release in May after Sony made it remove the IP. Apparently this was a PlayStation style racer that is now going to be called Nightmare Kart and have no Bloodborne characters. So this doesn't feel like this was a full-on DMCA situation, although it may very well have been the case. Let's see. They received a letter from Sony demanding that she remove all Bloodborne branding from the game. This is another example, though, where this is a game that would have gotten no press coverage whatsoever if it hadn't used something they didn't have the copyright for, so they're benefiting from Bloodborne branding. Perhaps this was a story more where this at some way had the blessing of somebody at Sony, and then they lost that blessing, more than just what Nintendo would have done, which would have been full-on DMCA. You've infringed on our copyright, we now own your fan game, and oh, by the way, you owe us millions of dollars. It definitely comes off way better than what Nintendo would have done. Here they're referencing a Pokemon fan game repository, Relic Castle, being shut down following a DMCA notice. And that may have been the Pokemon Company more than Nintendo, but there's very little difference between the Pokemon Company and Nintendo, since Nintendo owns a large amount of the Pokemon Company. I don't really understand the idea of making a Bloodborne themed Mario Kart clone and making it PlayStation 1 style and visuals. It all feels very weird. But yeah, whatever. The Google hackers who got the PS Portal to run PSP games offline helped Sony to patch out the exploit. The team of Google Cloud vulnerability researchers responsibly reported the issue. Which, yeah. So, once again, the PlayStation Portal is way too overpriced and pretty useless as a device, because all it can really do is stream games. I would almost hope that the PlayStation Portal was made and rushed out as a competitor to the Steam Deck because they got some kind of insider information. And that is just the reason why it is so bad. Because there is just, compared to the Steam Deck, nothing here that appeals to have what very obviously just looks like a tablet screen with some controllers attached, and then have really no operating system or software to speak of that anybody can sing the praises of. To miss the touchpads, which some PlayStation controllers do have touchpads, and not really accommodate a desktop mode. There's no desktop mode in the PlayStation Portal at all. It very much feels like an also-ran type product. I did, when looking at the internals, find that the Steam OLED, at least the version I have, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple of versions out there, it does have a Samsung display on it. As far as Samsung LCD being a separate company from the rest of Samsung in Korea. But yeah, so it was an interesting bit of information. Video Games Chronicle says Nintendo survey is asking for feedback on Mario RPG, Paper Mario, and Mario and Luigi games. The survey asks players if they liked or disliked the previous entries. So, with a new person in charge of Nintendo, it seems like they perhaps are reevaluating, the new president is reevaluating where the interest is and whether they should actually try and make any sequels or not. Although very often these surveys mean nothing and are just used to justify whatever the people in charge at a company wanted to do in the first place. But I definitely could see a thing where, while it is very traditional in Japan to honor the previous president and just continue to do what the previous president did, they eventually do need to establish themselves as being independent, the new president does, and would certainly just not have that emotional reaction to certain things. Where I wouldn't be surprised if there was a case where anytime anybody suggested a Metroid game in Nintendo, that the old president of Nintendo just said, nah, we don't care about Metroid games. Whereas that feeling may not be the same. Inherently, I still very much think, as a Japanese company, they care first and foremost about what the Japanese fans want and what the Japanese sales numbers look like, regardless of the fact that international sales numbers and the international demand will far outweigh what any one country, even Japan, sales numbers and the demand would be. They still are first and foremost interested only in pleasing the Japanese audience first, which isn't inherently wrong to know who you want your audience to be and make games towards that audience and let the rest of the world come on to the ride, but don't let the rest of the world dictate to you how you make the art you want to make. And I definitely feel like I'm in a weird position where I would be kind of happy to play Mario RPG, but I'd be kind of peeved also if they came out with a Mario RPG 2, because that's just a lot of time commitment, and almost certainly they wouldn't make a Mario RPG 2 game. They would just make some new game that's like Mario RPG but would have a new name and a new title and not include this character or this character in it and not involve Square Enix, which I believe Square Enix was involved in Mario RPG. There is definitely a gap to make something that would be closer to a Kingdom Hearts with Mario characters, which is effectively what Mario RPG I think was originally supposed to be, is that it was supposed to be Mario and Square Enix characters. But I'm not sure. It didn't really end up that way. So this person got retweeted and seemed to be posting a lot of information. There's a lot of talk right now and screenshots being shared around Stellar Blade and just awkward boob jiggle talk and things like that. There's still this is a great time to kind of turn off from Stellar Blade. Either play the game now because you're hyped enough on it, or wait until actual reviews come in. This skin suit, for instance, disables Eve's shield, making the gameplay more difficult. So if you want to wear this ridiculous too extreme skin suit, it makes the game harder. Meanwhile, Shift Up, which at the moment I kind of feel like Shift Up is mostly the CEO and his personal desires, that Shift Up is being run by one true leader and fan of a certain type of games, but also is in part owned by Tencent, and so there's a question there as far as just who really is still working at Shift Up for this next new project, or are they going to simply hire a whole bunch more people? I guess though you could shift everybody that worked on Stellar Blade to this next new project, which they've announced. Their next game is going to be a cross-platform, next generation new project. It's going to be a AAA urban sci-fi action RPG. Cross-platform is mobile, console, and PC. Cross-platform is somewhat concerning, but they have gone. There's a real danger of going too far too fast and hiring a bunch of people who are just not going to be the same programmers who made Stellar Blade. And I really question how many programmers that made Stellar Blade also worked on Nikke Goddess of Victory, which is a mobile game with anime waifus. Also, visually here you have a fairly large shift between the live 2D or 2D moe anime style, or kawaii anime style, maybe that would be more kawaii, and 3D CGI lewd character design in Stellar Blade. And they certainly aren't mentioning Destiny Child, which was their first game, which was also 2D anime, live 2D games. So yeah, I wonder if Shift Up as a company that seems to be growing very quickly here can maintain what it was and maintain its employee base, or if it isn't just going to grow too large. We saw better examples of that with like Gearbox, in that Gearbox and Gearbox Montreal, Gearbox Quebec being two new studios with Gearbox as their name, really not having any of the employees from the Gearbox Texas original location. So at any point, I wouldn't be surprised if games came out by Gearbox, now owned by Take-Two, that were made by completely different people, played completely different, and just in no way had the same focus or feeling that the original Gearbox had around Borderlands. Apparently a 27-year-old man has been arrested for sending death threats to Nintendo, which this happened, I guess, in Japan. There's a lot of news stories here, and these weren't the news stories I actually was following. I probably should just subscribe to this this person, but yeah, he is a side character from Stellar Blade. I wouldn't be surprised if there are several side characters in the full game of Stellar Blade that get a little bit of focus, although Nier Automata is kind of bad about that, in that there are side characters, but nobody really cares about any of them other than 2B. Let's see. The story that we tweeted that I wanted to talk about was that the president of Shift Up had bought all of his employees PlayStation 5s They seem like they post and retweet way too much information here, and it seems to be fairly focused around Japanese games. So if I did follow this person on Steam, skin suit is apparently skin colored fabric. Okay. Here's the story I wanted to talk about. After Stellar Blade, originally known as Project Eve, appeared in the 2021 PlayStation Showcase, the Shift Up CEO Kim Hyung Tai, if I pronounce that correctly, bought all 260 staff members a PlayStation 5. He said he chose the PS5 as a surprise gift. That's not how you spell surprise. You spell it with an S. So they could all play the game when it was released. Well, assuming this is true, which I probably should not make that assumption, that's an interesting insight, because it means, first of all, that the CEO did not suspect that his 260 staff members had PS5s at that point, which is a decent suspicion, certainly in 2021, is that they wouldn't have PS5s. Or at least the majority wouldn't have them. And it's not a terrible thing to give an extra PS5 to somebody. They could give it away easily, or sell it. But yeah, Shift Up making mobile games up until that point, it would make a lot of sense that they wouldn't have PlayStations. It's interesting that PlayStation didn't just give him a bunch of PlayStations, although 260 staff members would be quite a lot of money there. But that, I think, highlights two things. First of all, that the CEO is a fairly generous and passionate person, whereas an American CEO would almost never do that for any number of staff, or they'd give one away to somebody. But it also highlights that Shift Up, even in 2021, only had 260 members of staff, which it could be everybody from the lowest of secretary or janitor to the CEO himself. There's other controversies and people getting dunked on for saying that the body positive imagery, I guess is how you would phrase it, of Stellar Blade. The people have said that it was made by somebody who's never seen a woman, and then they didn't do their research and find out that no, the model is actually a Asian woman who was 3D scanned to get the body proportions. And frankly, when you're talking about this character, there's not really anything off on the body proportions to even complain about, so making that complaint seems ridiculous. It's not like she has massive boobs or giant hips or tiny waist or like super thick thighs or super big butt. This is all very anatomically correct. It just has kind of a traditional Korean visual aesthetic to be beautiful, like you would see in a lot of K-pop type shows. And then they were complaining about the art style, saying that whoever animated over the 3D modeling scans had never seen a woman or was being inappropriate. And then they didn't do the research, because apparently the main animator is the wife of the CEO and a female. So yeah, the ideal, particularly in Korea, of people being beautiful, men and women, is fairly high. You only have to watch a little bit of K-pop or Korean dramas or anything from Korea, and you'll see that that they definitely have a desire for beautiful, blemish-free people, Korean people, to be displayed. There is not a high number of overweightness in Korea that is depicted, and I don't think that really exists. And yeah. So yeah, that is just the beauty aesthetic that is in demand from Korean art. You certainly could make some other arguments about unrealistic animations if you went back and talked about Nikkei Goddess of Victory, which is obviously over the top in its live 2D depictions, or if you talked about some of the characters from Destiny Child Eater. There are definitely some characters there that are not anatomically realistic. But Eve here, which I believe is her name, is downright like homely compared to some of the characters that Shift Up have made in the past. And so it definitely is an interesting shift that is getting some people to write clickbait articles around, in that you have one company, seemingly exactly one company, willing to go from being a lewd, mature only mobile game maker to being a lewd, mature only PC game maker, where we really haven't ever seen that happen before, and there's just been too much pressure. Meanwhile, the Western audience of game developers is either completely ignoring that as even being a possibility, or is unwilling to consider doing the same and competing on that playfield, which I'd like to see that change personally. I'd like to see a Microsoft style company saying, you know what, let's make Doom more mature. Let's have more adult content and romance and lewdness and sexuality in our games. But particularly in the United States, those game companies are just not willing to do that. Whereas you do see a little bit of that in Witcher 3. But you also definitely didn't see anybody pushing back on Witcher 3 as much as they're pushing back on Stellar Blade. Perhaps that's because the adult sections in Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk are hidden more and not as obvious. And perhaps it is because they present male characters on the box art, where Stellar Blade obviously is about a female character first and foremost. The real hope here for me is that Shift Up doesn't grow too big too fast and then just completely fall apart or get bought out and then ruined, but also that they don't end up just making a terrible game, which is potentially a problem. There's a big difference, I would assume, between Stellar Blade and Nikkei Goddess of Victory as far as how they're making their money, and if they put just even a ton of microtransactions in Stellar Blade, I think there would be a major negative pushback. The truth of it is, we'll probably have Stellar Blade come out, it'll be 7 out of 10, and then it'll get underreported and undersell somewhat, and then that'll be it, and then hopefully it will make enough money for Tencent and Shift Up to continue to make games. And that I'd just like them to be a independent company every now and then, making a game that is a little lewd, well, to fill that gap. Whereas most other adult game makers are making extremely explicit adult games and then being hidden away in separate market stores and websites that most people don't even know anything about. Here's the GameDeveloper.com article showing Shift Up is hiring for a AAA urban sci-fi adventure action RPG, which really sounds like it could be fairly similar to Nikke Goddess of Victory. But yeah. The slightly good news is that most of the people who put reaction headlines and articles around video games saying this is not appropriate to have a character that looks like this, most of those people either know nothing about anime or have been completely rejected from being heard from anime fans. There's just too much kawaii and moe and skin and lewd and cheesecake elements in anime for any real anime fan to say, you know what, I'm gonna listen to this and I want my anime to be less tantalizing or titillating. Like, it's just not gonna happen. And anime creators or animators aren't going to listen to those reactionary elements, where game developers have unfortunately listened to those hot take reactions. But I don't think Shift Up is willing to do that. It will be using the Unreal Engine, and monsters and creatures will appear. It will be interesting to see if Stellar Blade leads to another publishing deal with Sony, now that a Japanese guy, the CEO of Sony in total, not just Sony Interactive Entertainment, is the interim president of Sony Interactive Entertainment. Because certainly Korean people and Japanese people have a very sordid history and tend not to really like each other. So just based on past historical hostilities, I wouldn't be surprised if Sony is not willing to actually be the publisher and fund the development of another game. If Stellar Blade doesn't sell well, Sony probably wouldn't fund it, and frankly Sony may just go in different directions for other reasons. So there is this weird scenario where Stellar Blade sells amazingly and they still really struggle to find a publisher to pay for the development of the next game, and Stellar Blade almost certainly won't profit enough that they would have extra money to self-publish and self-develop another game. If they did, it would almost certainly have to be scaled down less. Nikke Goddess of Victory is making a fairly large amount of money on mobile last time I looked, in the top 20 or 30 sellers of mobile games, but I doubt that's would fund enough to make a new Unreal Engine AAA game. And I would say there is room for perhaps changing some things too. Like, from what I can tell, you've got the most recent 3 stories all being kind of sci-fi based and in an urban environment. It would probably help if they tried to have a fantasy environment, or at least have their games stand out in theme a little bit more. Otherwise, my suspicion might be that this new project may just be an RPG game based off Nikke Goddess of Victory, which is more of a casual idle game more than anything. But no, I might be more interested in the Nikke series if they did make it slightly different style of gameplay. That is certainly a thought, that they could evolve up the Nikke series. It would be kind of nice if they didn't just abandon everything. Although, in fairness, I'd like their first game, Destiny Child, to come back in some way. So if there was a reboot or a continuation or a sequel to their now shut down first game, Destiny Child, that would be interesting, but it probably wouldn't be a sci-fi game in that case, because Destiny Child was definitely a fantasy demons and magic game story. Anyways, we've talked too much about Nikkei today. Apparently, Unity sees web GPU as a growing market for game development. Developers looking for a fresh field to make games and should head to the World Wide Web, Unity says. I have no idea what web GPU is. This is the first time I've ever heard of it. I know that HTML has tried to just increasingly have more visuals and graphics in websites, making websites slower and more memory intensive for just to make them slightly flashier. But I've never really seen anything even as good as, say, Real Players plugin or Java plugins to run games and websites. Yeah. Particularly with Java's support just being ended, the idea of making games on a website is kind of ridiculous. And I just don't think a browser-based JavaScript API web GPU should be the way forward to make games, or to have games in websites in the first place. But yeah, this is all a little bit over my head as far as what web GPU might be. And in a lot of ways, it feels to me like you're creating a solution for the wrong problems, in that you're starting from the flawed concept of let's make a video game inside an internet browser which is not designed to run video games, and using the JavaScript API web GPU, but also inherently using JavaScript, which is not really designed for making video games. None of this feels future forward either. JavaScript is an old programming language. HTML is a very old programming compositing language, not really a programming language. Adding something on top of that just seems like you're building a house on shifting sands, where it would make a lot more sense to be future forward and say, hey, here's a Rust based API that's going to use Rust instead of C++ or C# to program games, and thus it will be more secure and safer and not crash as much, hopefully. But yeah, inherently also a interim CEO of Unity probably shouldn't know anything about any of this, and so he may just be spouting off talking points that somebody else handed to him. But yeah, I don't see web GPU becoming a thing, since I've never heard of it. Maybe it will be though, who knows. I don't think though games on browsers makes a lot of sense either. Apparently Xbox is working on an AI chatbot to handle customer support requests. This is from Video Games Chronicle. Inherently you don't want to see people's jobs going away because it's being replaced with AI, but I have to admit, I doubt there's anybody out there that actually enjoys being a customer support employee. There are also people certainly that don't enjoy starving to death and need their jobs. That's most people. But from a consumer level, a decent AI chatbot on a website for customer support requests tends to get the job done just as well as talking to a real person or chatting even via text to a real person. And it 100% really comes down to just what has the AI chatbot been programmed to actually allow to happen and respond with, because it really doesn't matter if it's an AI chatbot or a real human. If the policy is to just spout off nonsense until the person gets upset and hangs up, then that's just going to be the policy that the AI chatbot does. And that's how a lot of companies run their customer support, is to just transfer people over and over again until the line drops, or annoy people with stupid questions, or just spout off lies and nonsense to be incredibly unhelpful as possible. So, on the other hand, if you have a good chatbot and a good policy made by the management above the customer service people, then a chatbot might very easily be able to direct you in the right directions. Sometimes a helpful customer service representative will also direct you to options you are not made aware of and help you more because of that, but very rarely is that the case. And for the most part, you just don't want to have to handle customer support. In particular, Xbox, I think it's mostly going to be dealing with the same things over and over again. My kid purchased something that I didn't really authorize. I've forgotten my password to log into Xbox. Why am I banned? Remember, Xbox also announced their strike system, which I guess hasn't actually come into play yet because I haven't heard anybody say anything about it. But yeah. What this does, I think, on a broader scale, probably point out is that Microsoft is willing to fire people and replace them with AI in customer support realm. So why wouldn't they be equally willing to fire people and replace them with AI in the development of games, in voice acting, in programming, in art creation? It definitely feels like that is the direction that's at least a decent amount of people in Xbox and Microsoft are willing to go. We've already seen that at least one advertisement from Xbox, or representing Xbox at least, seems to have had AI art in it. But yeah, they are not going to be shy about trying to use this. Although in fairness, Microsoft has their own AI algorithm, large language module. So people in Microsoft who run their AI system, which I forget the name of it even, may very well be pushing the Xbox divisions to integrate that and use that as much as possible. This may very well be a mandate from Steve Ballmer that every department should consider using AI and give a report back as far as how they're planning on integrating AI. GameDeveloper.com has this article saying that the FTC has blocked facial recognition plans for game purchases. I wonder what is the reason for it. FTC denied a proposal to use facial recognition technology to verify the ages of anyone buying mature rated games. I wouldn't be surprised that this is a case where they don't think it's accurate enough, and that you cannot 100% guarantee that somebody is over a certain age based on facial recognition. Whereas consumers would very much be concerned if it became even an option to turn on your camera and point your face at it to log into a porn site or buy a mature rated video game. The vast majority of video games are rated M for mature, by the way, so this would also probably hurt sales to some percentage. The ESRB was teaming with Super Awesome and Yachty. The Super Awesome must be some different company than what I'm thinking of. On the privacy protection facial age estimation. It has estimation in the name, and that stands for PPFAE, which is a terrible initialism. Per the FTC, the denial vote was 4-0 without prejudice, which means they can submit it again. Its reasoning was due to the Child Online Privacy Protection Act rule. Online services have acceptable methods to gain parental consent for anyone 13 and under. Now, it's important to point out that a bill, which is almost certainly going to be challenged in the Florida state court, it's a state bill in Florida, has been, I believe, signed into law that would forbid children to have social media accounts under the age of 12, I believe, at all. And I don't know if it even allows parental consent between the age of 13 and, one would assume, 18, at which point they'd be considered an adult. Which that certainly will be challenged too. It would almost certainly, as a law, fail, and they probably know it's going to fail, but it is the kind of headline grabbing law to sign anyways. I think you might have an argument under the Interstate Commerce Act to inherently bring it to a federal law to inherently challenge that state law in Florida. And inherently, it's important to point out that the United States government has never really committed to giving any rights to children. They basically consider children property with a few rights at most until they're 18 years old and an adult, and at which point then you have constitutional protections and rights. Inherently, being denied the ability to go to a social media site is being denied to go to any social media site in particular is being denied the ability to express your speech, and it is effectively a limitation on free speech on an entire class of people, in this case children under 13, which, yeah, that really shouldn't stand up as a law just on the free speech concept. Apparently 350 comments were submitting the following concerns, with concerns raised about privacy, accuracy, and deep fakes. Last year the ESB acknowledged those risks, but also argued that parents would still have control over what they shared. However, the FTC noted that Yachty sent a proposal in September for the facial age estimation model submitted to the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Interesting that the NIST was involved, and that's still being processed and could materially assist the FTC and the general public in better understanding the age verification technologies. So inherently, they denied this, I think, because they sent over a proposal and the NIST still hasn't gotten back on their own opinion based on that proposal. Doesn't seem like they're actually submitting any kind of software, though, that could be tested. It also pointed out a provision in the COPPA also allows new approval methods to be submitted. As a result, a new proposal could be submitted in the not too distant future, which I wouldn't be surprised if the ESRB submits this over and over again until it finally does get approved, and that is just probably the process to which things like this get approved. Inherently, though, I wouldn't expect the United States to protect its citizens on this. I would assume that eventually this would get approved, the idea of facial recognition as a way of age verification, and then immediately trying to be abused. Like, we already have Texas has already passed a law for requiring high levels of privacy breaching secure IDs to be collected to go to porn sites, and Pornhub has already effectively blocked all traffic from Texas because they cannot and will not comply with the law, the Texas law. They cannot, because even if they did implement that system, nobody would actually give their ID to Pornhub. They'd just use a VPN and go somewhere else. But yeah, it is potentially a terrifying future if all of a sudden you have a state like Texas saying you have to have your face scanned every time you want to go to a porn site, or every time you want to go to any site for any adult. It would create way more tracking, which we already have a world with way too much tracking. And inherently, I just don't think this solves the problem. What I imagine would be helpful is some form of actual ID card, and the United States has never really been willing to do just a national ID card. Social security cards are not supposed to be ID cards, and driver's license and passports are about the closest thing you have to a national ID card. But it would make a lot of sense to have just a NFC tap to pay style credit card that was your ID card, exclusively for ID. But even that doesn't really address major issues. Kids will always find ways to buy mature rated games, or get mature rated games one way or the other. You could shoplift them, you can have an older person buy them for you, you can take them from an older sibling or an older person in general. And this is about buying right now, but very quickly it's going to be about launching, where you would have to scan your face every single time. Just look at like how many people actually use Face Unlock on the iPhone. There's probably a decent number of people that do that, but there's also a lot of people that are not willing to do Face Unlock on iPhones or Android phones. Anyways, moving on. And then I wanted to mention this. Rockstar has revealed 2 more games coming to its GTA Plus subscription service, that being Bully and LA Noire. And mainly I wanted to mention this just as a sad statement around how Bully and LA Noire have been effectively ignored and forgotten about. That instead of being products that more than likely deserved more sequels, or actual sequels, one sequel even. Alright, I'm gonna pause the recording and take a small break, and then I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. That actually wasn't really that long of a break. So let's now go through all the new games on Steam from the last stream that I was going to highlight. Inherently, I feel like there's this is a player versus player game, that's why it's not on my follow list. This game, content warning, I'm not sure this game actually is available anymore. It is, but now it actually costs money, which is funny because I thought this was an April Fool's Day joke game, and it definitely feels like it is, and yet 500 positive reviews, massive amount of people playing it. This might be the one example here of a game actually succeeding as an April Fool's Day joke. Now, the interesting question to ask here, though, is has anybody actually bought the game for $8? Or did everybody grab it for free? And I definitely question whether I should grab free games. I probably should. My Steam collection already is overwhelming at 1,400 games. What's one more going to do? Even if it's not something I'm going to actually ever play personally. With Steam Family sharing, it definitely is a case now where you really should just grab everything if it even seems slightly decent. Now, here you have an example of what looks like it's just a Chinese visual novel of no real interest that's free, but I'm not going to grab that. I'm going to curate at least a little bit. I haven't been able to experiment anymore with Steam Family, but there really is no way to have a Steam Deck and not be in the Steam Family's beta. You're going to just have an incredibly terrible time. You know, we've got some more RPG Maker games with anime girls in it. It should be in the adult section based on the tags. I really wish Steam would fix that. It's so stupid that you can have sexual content, nudity, not safe for work as tags, and then yet your game is not in the adult section, and its actual description may be explicit or may not. Yeah, the fact that I'm spending way more time commuting for the next couple of weeks than actually sitting around in a waiting room has also made it completely unviable to try and curate any games or even curate the fall list. Fall list I can do, but it's just not really reasonable to do that. One of the things that I would say is also still a problem with KDE Plasma and the desktop mode of SteamOS is that by default there is not a good way to connect to a WireGuard server, which is not to say that it's not integrated, and not to say that there isn't a click box that says automatically connect to this VPN, but if you're going to connect to somebody's guest Wi-Fi, it's probably going to have a captive portal where you have to click and sign in. And so when you click and sign in, I'm going to put this on the follow list just to see if people actually like it. If you have a VPN trying to connect before you click and accept the terms and sign in or do whatever to that captive portal on a guest Wi-Fi, it doesn't it doesn't work effectively. So the only real solution that needs to be implemented there is just not there, in that it should do its connectivity check, if it's going to do a connectivity check at all, which maybe it shouldn't. Determine that you need to sign in, then enable the network interface and have you sign in first. Then enable the VPN. There's just no good system to do that. You basically need to, the closest thing I've been able to do is just have a script wait until it can determine that you're online, and they do have a nice command line for that. It's basically nm for network manager -online in KDE Plasma, and then run a connection command for the WireGuard VPN, which in my case, WireGuard VPN is just connecting me back to my house, and that way I can make sure nobody's trying to snoop, or try my best to prevent people from snooping on web traffic in between it, which honestly, the web traffic on my Steam Deck is probably not that big of a deal. WireGuard does not work, unfortunately, if you're running the beta on the gaming mode of SteamOS at all by default, and you can't use the Decky plugin that would allow you to enable WireGuard. Now, the gaming mode of SteamOS inherently is assuming that if you're going to use a VPN, you're doing it because you're cheating for some reason, or you're trying to buy games in a different region than what you should be doing. That's not what I'm using my VPN for. So inherently, by making it an auto start script that only starts up when you log in to the desktop mode, it gets around that issue. Of course, that means that if you are rebooting your Steam Deck, it will very possibly connect to a Wi-Fi that you don't trust and send gaming data through that Wi-Fi that you may not trust, but you shouldn't really be trusting any of them. That is a more technical issue, but definitely is something that I should also file a feature request for. There has only been a little bit of progress. I almost want to say yes to this visual novel. I'll give it a chance. I lost my train of thought. I was talking about WireGuard and I lost my thought. There's certainly something else though that the Steam Deck should consider, is the idea of putting a SIM card into it. Micro SIM card with a cell phone 5G connection. But I don't know how many people would really want to pay to have a choppy cell phone connection, even at 5G, that wouldn't actually benefit you. I kind of question whether the Steam Deck even really would benefit from a Wi-Fi 6E or 7 connection. Yes, theoretically, if you're very close to a Wi-Fi router, you could wirelessly connect and get faster times, but in practicality, you still probably shouldn't want to game over a wireless connection. And I don't know how Steam Deck can really account for that. It makes an argument that they should probably make a base that would plug into your wired network and then have a Wi-Fi 7 or Wi-Fi 6E access point specifically dedicated and designed to pair specifically with just a Steam Deck. Yeah, I definitely don't have anything to say about any of these games. Seems like we're starting to see a lot of slide puzzle games with this visual aesthetic. OG games. I'm going to keep an eye on that name and see if we start to see a bunch of games being flooded on the Steam marketplace. Inherently, if something connects to a wireless network and you've labeled it as something that has a captive portal login requirement, you should be able to figure out quickly how to make a script to automate going around that. And so the second day, the next day you go there, you're not just clicking the same thing over and over again. Now inherently also, I would say a captive portal should know the MAC address and the machine address of the Wi-Fi client that's connecting and know that you already accepted it once, so it shouldn't be asking every day. But yeah, there's been really no progress at all around a real need to have people agree to terms of service so that they're not just connecting to your guest Wi-Fi. Although, frankly, I'm not sure if the acceptable use policies really matter at all, particularly if it's not programmable. Like, I think it may be just lawyers demanding things that really don't matter. You could probably just post the agreement on the wall with the Wi-Fi password, and people who are going to care about that are going to be few and far between, and everybody else is just going to do whatever they were going to do anyways. Most people weren't going to plan on joining via some guest Wi-Fi. The problem with a lot of these games is that they're being released on April Fool's Day, so there is a decent chance that even though they may be real games for real money, that there's just not a real reason to ever play or buy the games. And then inherently, I wouldn't want to release my game on April 1st, because every year people would look at that game and go, well, is this an April Fool's Day joke or not? Which that might explain why I really don't feel like there's a lot of games here that feel like they need to be mentioned. Inherently, it is also a mistake for me to spend too much energy trying to figure out how to log in to a captive portal very quickly, automatically, because I'm not anticipating that I'll be connecting to the same guest Wi-Fi's even 3 weeks from now ever again, and or connecting to other people's guest Wi-Fi's. But I certainly could see if you're at a school, if you're at an office, if you're constantly logging into guest Wi-Fi's every single day, that would be an issue. That is certainly one thing I've been thinking about as far as the Steam Deck, is that it almost certainly is best suited for people who are working a job. Yeah. Like, if you were working in some office and you had 30-minute to an hour breaks every day, it is probably a great gaming device in that case. Plus, it's your own personal PC, so you can create a very nice separation there between what are people doing on your computer or PC versus what you're doing for your own personal use and for your own personal privacy on your Steam Deck. If you really are keeping a separation there, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of offices give you at least some side eye if you bring a Steam Deck out, in that they're afraid you're stealing corporate secrets. But yeah. Also, if you're working on some side project during your lunch break or something, that's going to be some weirdness too. I imagine there's somebody out there that would be logging into an adult site, a porn site, on their Steam Deck in the office, and that still probably would not be acceptable or professional, and I wouldn't think it would be to be in public doing that. But I could certainly see shopping, Amazon.com, things not logging into people's computers. I could see also if you were working out in the field somewhere, if you were working construction, where you typically don't have PCs in front of you and computers, it would be very advantageous there. Anyways, I'm going to try and wrap up somewhat quickly here. Counter-Strike 2 has a massive amount of people playing it right now, it seems like, in the 24-hour peak. I think some of that might be because there's something going on. I have heard something about like some Half-Life remakes with ray tracing projects that are in the works, but maybe those aren't out yet. Yeah, that looks like some massive numbers, where Dota has pretty low numbers. And then you're not even to like the 10th spot before you're below 200,000. And that the 7th spot is being Source SDK, which really is just playing Counter-Strike 2. Content warning has popped up in the 10th spot. So, weirdly, it might be the best and most successful game for 2024's first half at this rate. Everything else, according to my chart, assuming it's accurate, seems to be trending downward, with content warning starting here as a new dot, just tinily squeezed here, and I assume it might pop up as we go along. And there's basically nothing on sale right now, which we haven't had any confirmation of a summer sale, but one does expect it to happen. My main concern, for my own jealousy reasons, would be to not see the Steam Deck either get majorly updated or go on a major discount during the Steam sale, which I doubt that's going to happen. And then something went wrong with my articles, so Video Games Chronicle is way on the other side of the tabs, as we'll do the headlines. Hopefully this will work. Respawn apologizes for Apex Legends account reset and lost progress issues. By the way, headlines and clips are sort of working. They still need a lot of tweaking to happen, but I'm slowly thinking about fixing them so clips will happen. Chapter markers, I'm not sure we've really made any progress. I haven't really looked at them. I could see myself not really spending any time with the chapter markers and just giving up on those. Let's continue. So that's not going to work. I'm going to have to start on the other side of the tabs. Tekken 8 players are expressing frustration at the addition of a new Tekken Fight Pass. South Park Snow Day debuts at 3rd place in this week's UK physical charts. Some of these articles may be older. Nobu Imatsu will compose the main theme for Final Fantasy VII Remake's trilogy's final game. Discord will reportedly roll out sponsored ads this week. I think they've done that now. Ubisoft is laying off a further 45 staff as part of its plan to streamline operations. Like a Dragon Studio head says Yakuza Kiwami 3 will come out at some point. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth director and others promoted at Square Enix. That's an interesting twist of fate, but it probably does either say that they are promoting people because they expect them to be in charge and continue doing more of what they have done, Or maybe they are promoting people to get them out of game making roles and into middle management roles where they perhaps could do less harm. I suspect it's more the first than the latter, and that we will see more Final Fantasy Rebirth people and type of games. I would imagine they might want to just remake everything in the same way that Resident Evil is just remaking everything. That may be the growing trend amongst the existing strong big video game companies in Japan. Warcraft boss is open to licensing to third-party studios, but it has to be the right partner. That's probably a pretty small list, the series general manager says. Yeah. Inherently, somebody should be making a proper Warcraft 3, not just World of Warcraft spin-off games, which World of Warcraft being a spin-off is a funny thing to say, but technically it's true. And I don't know how many people want or could make a decent real-time strategy game like Warcraft, though. And at a certain level, it kind of feels like Hearthstone is based off of the Warcraft characters. I'd pretty much assume that's the case. So, yeah. I don't know what other kinds of games you could make around Warcraft that would be interesting. 90s first-person shooter PO'd is seemingly getting a remaster by Night Dive Studios. Helldivers 2 latest updates adds blizzards and sandstorms and increases the level cap. Dave the Diver is coming to PlayStation Plus game catalog this month. Xbox showcases 4 upcoming ID and Xbox indie titles. The games are Botany Manor, Jump Ship, Nightscape, and Still Wakes the Deep. Which Botany Manor, I believe, is a puzzle game that looks kind of pretty. Still Wakes the Deep feels kind of like it might be a horror, maybe even Bioshock and visuals game. Jump Ship looks like it's a sci-fi game. I haven't heard of that one. And Nightscape looks like it might be some kind of astronomer adventure game from the looks of it. Well, I kind of like these ideas of just having 4 games highlighted, 4 indie games in particular, instead of having larger, longer presentations. I think these kinds of directs will inherently start to eat away at the idea of longer presentations where you have multiple games being shown off. But it may not really go down that way, because I could see also having an indie direct that shows off 4 indie games and then putting in those trailers into a bigger presentation when you have an Xbox direct that highlights AA and AAA games also, just using them as filler effectively. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to do that. They pretty much do that now. And new Xbox Game Pass titles for console, PC, and cloud have been revealed. This includes Lego 2K Drive, which that is almost certainly a game that should have always been free and come in the Game Pass. EA Sports PGA Tour, Harold Halibut, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Which Shadow of the Tomb Raider is airing on my channel right now as of recording, and yeah, not a lot of people watching it, which is not super surprising. Tales of Kenzera Zhao will hit PlayStation Plus game catalog on day 1. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. There was a story, and I didn't bring it up, from Censored Gaming that aired just as I started streaming today, talking about how Nintendo has made a listing specifically looking for a localizer, and one of the requirements of the job requirements is to be aware of things like diversity, equality, and inclusion, DEI, and make appropriate or make suggestions based on those things, which in fairness the job requirement does require an awareness to it. It doesn't inherently mean that Nintendo is looking for somebody who is a slave to wokeism ideas and DEI as a general concept, although diversity, equity, and inclusion are all good ideas, so I'm not willing to start to like straw man anything that uses DEI as a concept, even though I know a lot of people are going to use that as a bludgeon to inject ridiculous ideas and thoughts. Inherently, that led me to thinking, though, you have a game that looks like this. If you had a Japanese company like Nintendo try to make a game like this, inherently it's going to feel off and feel probably a little racist, because Japanese people just don't know a lot about African or people of African descent. It's not their story to tell. And so it is this weird catch-22 where, yes, there are no people of color in Mario RPG except for Mario, who is an Italian and was considered to be a person of color in the past at least. But also, the second Nintendo of Japan tried to put a person of color in a game like Mario RPG or any Mario game, it's just going to cause them frustration. I love, in contrast, to see a company that has that kind of story to tell and has a makeup of people who can appropriately and passionately tell that story, try and tell that story. And I look forward to games like this to see what kind of story they can tell. Although, it is also fair to say that black gamers in particular may not be that interested in African historical inspired or African tribalism inspired stories, because it's just not what an American kid who happens to be black growing up in the United States has really no connection to this. They may be from a completely different tribe from what this story might be referencing, if this is referencing any real history at all, and it's just not their experience. And particularly when you look at like black fans of anime, they love Dragon Ball Z, and they don't tend to complain that there isn't a black character in Dragon Ball Z, and that it isn't speaking to them in terms that might be considered pandering. People of all different creeds and races are all capable of embracing other stories from other people and enjoying them very much. So, going on a bit of a rant there, let's move on. The Nocturnal Vapor Xbox Series X and S controller has been officially announced. This is one that was leaked earlier. It is, I suppose, interesting that the Steam Deck does not have a share button. There's a lot of buttons, certainly, but there is no real interest in a share button, which in fairness, I don't think there's a real interest in the share button even on the Xbox Series X and S controllers. That being said, I still feel like Xbox is probably #1 in the game for making good quality controllers with the buttons and the D-pads and things like that. I would potentially like to see Microsoft partnering with the Steam Deck just to make and find the suppliers to make the buttons and the analog sticks and the D-pads. I'd like to see that, frankly, I think, more than I'd like to see Hall effect sensor on the analog sticks, which that would be a nice thing to say you have, but that would probably not be felt as much as the sticky buttons that I'm feeling and the smaller buttons feel on the Steam Deck. Xbox is working on an AI chatbot to handle customer support requests. April's PlayStation Plus Essential games are now available to claim. Yellowbrick Games has announced an action-adventure title Eternal Strands. Rockstar has revealed 2 more games coming to its GTA Plus subscription service. Bungie will showcase delayed Destiny 2 expansion The Final Shape next week. Sony is planning a PlayStation showcase next month, it's been claimed. Silent Hill 2 could feature at that event. Nintendo survey asked for feedback on Mario RPG, Paper Mario, and Mario and Luigi games. I imagine they'll get the least response on Mario and Luigi games. I don't even know how many of those were made. Saber Interactive CEO says its Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake is still alive and well. A Zelda Tears of the Kingdom clothing range is coming to Uniqlo. The line will launch in Japan later this month, with a Western release to be confirmed. It's interesting, the models they have here, as far as this company, Uniqlo. I don't know who Uniqlo is, but apparently they've released several video game licensed t-shirts. I assume they're actually paying for the license. I have to question, certainly though, whether it's worth paying any kind of premium to have kid t-shirts with prints on them, particularly since I would be surprised if a lot of schools are still not really going to be happy with you wearing t-shirt prints. And frankly, it's just a dumb habit to wear t-shirts and get used to the idea that you can wear t-shirts with prints, because once you get into an office, it's not going to be professional to be wearing a t-shirt with a t-shirt print on in most office scenarios. So just getting used to wearing what you would call polo shirts that have collars and short sleeves and just no print, solid colors, or stripes, things like that. Those will suit you a lot better in a future office scenario. Of course, many offices, well, I bet not that many, but it used to be that offices would require you to have a full-on long sleeve shirt that buttoned up, had a collar, had a tie, had a suit, had a coat, had to have slacks, no cargo pants or shorts. Yeah, and don't wear shorts either, I would say. Don't get in the habit of wearing shorts, because that's also not going to be really professional looking. Yep. I don't ascribe to the idea of dressing up like 2-year-olds into suits or sailor outfits or whatever nonsense they used to do many years ago, but starting them on the right path to expect to wear certain kinds of clothes, and instead of trying to be fashionable or having a fashion accessory, is a smart move. I'm trying to hurry up here, and instead I'm ranting about clothing. Moving on. Consumers were mostly playing older games in 2023, a report suggests. Hackers who got the PS Portal to run PSP games offline helped Sony to patch out the exploit. Neo Sprint, Atari's reboot of its Sprint Racing series, comes to PC and console this summer. Interesting. That might be relevant enough to give it a look. The fan-made Bloodborne cart will get a rebrand release in May after Sony made it remove its IP, now being called Nightmare Cart. The new Fallout video goes behind the scenes on Amazon TV's series. Yeah, Amazon is definitely trying to promote this Fallout series somewhat, but I imagine really to gamers exclusively. I really haven't seen anybody else talking about it. Tekken Boss says younger players prefer team games so they can shift responsibility if they lose. Modern Warfare 3 and Warzone patch notes detail today's Season 3 update. Ubisoft confirms Forward event during Summer Game Fest week. that's going to be all the video games Chronicle news. Let's go through the Gamatsu news now as quickly as possible. 2D retro pixel art action adventure game Castaway has been announced for PC. Let's see. It definitely looks like it's inspired by a Zelda Link's Awakening game, and I always want one of those to be good. Unfortunately, there really hasn't been a lot of them on PC, nor have any of them felt great. Part of the problem certainly is I also personally ignore a lot of games like this because the visual aesthetic often tries to be in black and white, tries to be in a 4:3 or a 1:1 ratio instead of being widescreen, which just makes it look terrible to my eyes. Ubisoft Forward set for June 10th. Notice how Gamatsu puts the title of the date in the headline. Trigger Heart Excelia is coming to PC in April. I definitely recognize the Trigger Heart series. I don't know if it's anything of relevance though. It probably is. Looks like it's a shoot 'em up game. Run for Money, the Great Mission debut trailer, is available on Gamatsu. This looks like a Switch game exclusively. Timothy and the Tower of Mu is coming to Switch. It's currently available on PC since 2022. Let's see what the reviews are. Yeah, mixed. We still are increasingly seeing a lot of this too, where you have a game that is not being received particularly well for a couple years on Steam, never really had that many people playing it, making it inherently irrelevant and unworth my money, really, to purchase. The thing here, saying support for other devices is not known, is not as helpful as something it would directly tell me now whether it would support the Steam Deck or not. Partial controller support for an Xbox, which is what the partial element here is showing, is probably good as you're going to get for the Steam Deck. It probably will be about the same. Visually, I find this game interesting. I would probably have put this on the fall list, but with that reception, just nobody really caring, there's really no reason to put it on the fall list now. Kamara, a Frog Refuge, adds a Switch version. I bet this one... Wow, we missed it. An interesting idea of frog breeding, or making a frog farm, basically. It's an interesting twist on versus something like a cats and dogs game, except pet simulator. Although, can you really have a frog as a pet, or are you really just taking care of a wild animal at that point? Windblown gameplay trailer is available on Gamatsu. Is this on the follow list? I'm getting a little concerned here because I'm seeing a lot of games that are getting mentioned here that aren't on the fall list when they probably should be. I feel like I may have missed some games once again. Age of Water launches in early access on April 18th for the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. I will be excited to see what the reception to this game is, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it is really just not anything like Raft, and is instead a MMO that's kind of pirate-like, that people actually like shooting the other two AAA pirate games, if not quadruple A pirate games, in the foot at the same time. I have no idea what Ubisoft and Microsoft would really learn or should learn from that if Age of Water somehow is way more popular than Sea of Thieves or the other pirate game, which I confused those two. Saga Emerald Beyond demo launches April 4th. Scarlet Grace, shortened to Saga. Long-running franchise, the Scarlet Grace, although I'm not sure anybody really cares in the West about it. Atari announces arcade racing game Neo Sprint for all consoles and PC. Put that on the fall list. Weirdly though, this does just look like so many other racing games that have probably copied it, or copied the original version of this type of game, Sprint. Famitsu review scores for issue 1844 are available. Let's see. Alone in the Dark getting 31 out of 40. That's not terrible. It's not amazingly great. The Dragoness Commander Command of Flame, 25 out of 40. Dragon's Dogma 2, 32 out of 40. MLB The Show, 29 out of 40. Slave 0X, what is that game? 29 out of 40. And then South Park Snow Day getting a very poor 27 out of 40. Side-scrolling beat-em-up game. Let's see if we can see what it looks like. It's a provocative name to say the least. Almost certainly this would be rebranded to a different name if it comes to the West. Moving on. Neptunia vs. Titan Dogo announced for the PS4 and 5 and Switch. Let's see. I almost wonder if this was an April Fool's Day joke, but I'm gonna have to take it as it is. Yet another Neptunia game. Motorcycle action game is what they're describing it as. That'll be interesting if it actually comes out. Creature battle simulation game Dragon Saikyo Oizukon Battle Coliseum has been announced for Switch, due out July 4th in Japan. And definitely feel like that's going to get a different name if it came to the West. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't come to the West. It looks like what you would do if you were trying to make a Pokemon Battle Stadium without Pokemon, and instead using what you would probably describe as just kaiju, big monsters. Shift Up is hiring for a AAA urban sci-fi action RPG for console, PC, and mobile. We already talked about this before. I mean, it really does fill my heart with a little bit of joy that I get to legitimately talk about Shift Up and Nikkei Goddess of Victory, because with the censorship pushes that are pushed in Western games and on Steam and PC gaming in general, well, Steam in general specifically, you just don't get to show off the 2D anime waifus as much as they actually exist in video games and do show up. Yellow Brick Games announces a fantasy action adventure game, Eternal Strands, for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Let's see if we've got that on the follow list. Nope. Run for the Money, The Great Mission, has been announced for Switch. Soldner X Complete Collection has been announced for Switch. I would assume this is a shoot 'em up series. Yep, shoot 'em up. MechWarrior 5 Clans has a GDC 2024 demo trailer and screenshots on Gamatsu. Xbox Game Pass adds Lego 2K Drive, EA Sports PGA Tour, Harold Halibut, and more in April. Harold Halibut. Which one is that? It's this one. It's like a point-and-click adventure game, it looks like. Tales of Kenzera Zao is coming to the PlayStation Plus game catalog on day 1. Now this is the game we already talked about, but Gamatsu used a very different screenshot showing off a dragon attacking here instead of the main protagonist. Apparently this is a Metroidvania type game in more of a jungle-like environment. Yeah, I could definitely see that working. Dave the Diver for PS4 and 5 launches April 16th. Pathless Woods Early Access launch trailer is available on Gamatsu. Omega 6 The Triangle Stars launches July 25th. What is this coming to? Just the Switch? Apparently so. It says it's a visual novel. I would not have guessed that. I would have thought it would have been more of an 8-bit platformer type game or something like that. 16-bit retro futuristic sci-fi science fiction text adventure. That's what they're calling it. I think we need to check the trailer here. This is an hour and 26 minutes. This is when I use Japanese. Let's all sit at a table and discuss it forever with really very little polish. Yep, I'm not going to sit through that, obviously. Okay, moving on. Dragon's Dogma 2 sales top 2.5 million. Dragon's Dogma series sales have topped 10 million. So I'd assume that means that either there's one previous Dragon's Dogma game that sold 7.5 million, or there was a spin-off Dragon's Dogma game in the mix. I don't feel like anybody's really talking about Dragon's Dogma 2 or the series or the sales numbers. I don't think those sales numbers are as good. Kind of important to say here though, it's 2.5 million at $50, $60, $70. So you have to really multiply that to get to $20 million of, or no, $200 million of profit, of, not, maybe not profit, but income. Gross revenue, that might be the right word. Slice of life convenience store game in Konbini One Store Mini Stories has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Of course, the phrase Konbini is very much a Japanese phrase that means nothing to the Western audience. I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a low effort joke game. But weirdly, it seems to have a lot more visual polish to it than I thought it would. I also wouldn't be surprised though if this is also just an April Fool's Day game, which is still very much a possibility for all these news articles. Square Enix appoints new executive officers, Naoki Hamaguchi, Tomoya Asano, and more. Yep. It's, in my opinion, probably way better to follow lower level and mid-level creatives than the top tier creatives, particularly if they're being promoted to executive officers levels, although maybe executive officer here just is giving them more control and on autonomy, which that might actually be an amazingly good thing, in that Square Enix may be finally letting go of the reins of control for at least their Japanese employees and allowing them to actually focus on making games more. We'll see if that works for Square Enix or not. But the general assumption is that Square Enix management up until this point has been pretty bad, so any change in management or how much management is interfering might be a really good thing. Although inherently they are still weighing this by only giving the Japanese people promotions and not really focusing on any of their foreign offices, assuming Square Enix even has foreign offices left. Square Enix definitely feels like it may very much just be focused on Final Fantasy going forward. Moving on. Akitoshi Kawazu on the Saga Frontier 2 Remastered. You won't be disappointed if you wait. That's an interesting quote, but definitely is probably the right statement. Please be patient. Saga Frontier 2 Remastered makes me wonder if maybe there is an end to play Saga Frontier 1 Remastered and enter into the Saga series without overcommitting. Class of Heroes 1 and 2 Complete Edition launches April 26. It has an updated trailer on Komatsu now. Let's see. Still don't have a Steam link on it. And then Landfall releases a 4-player co-op horror game called Content Warning for PC. And then that'll bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles, which are already broken, so we'll just quickly scroll here and see if there's anything worth mentioning. Limit Break opens its 2024 mentorship program to help underrepresented and marginalized developers. At a certain level, I'd like to hear an explanation on who is marginalizing developers, who really is in control there, because at most it would be publishers in general, just a large cabal of every publisher that exists in the world not really working together, one would have to assume. Just an institutionalized marginalization happening from publishers. You could perhaps blame Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. Nobody's really going to stop you from publishing a PC game, though. And if you are going to make the argument that either Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo is marginalizing certain developers, I would like to see some evidence on that. Content Warning opens to nearly 205,000 players, and that's 6.2 million owners. Of course, the game was free, so 6.2 million owners right now is a number to take and subtract from any number that they say in the future, and that'll give you actual sales numbers, or at least closer to the actual sales number. A16Z Games commits $75 million to accelerator program for early game startups. Square Enix adds Final Fantasy VII Rebirth director and Octopath Traveler producer to executive board. We talked about the FTC blocking facial recognition plans for game purchases for now, and Xbox adding AI-powered chatbots. Dragon's Dogma 2 sales reaching 2.5 million in 2.5 weeks, which is an odd increment. Unity seeing web GPU as a growing market for game development. And then some of these stories are things we had already talked about, like Ubisoft laying off 45 employees to address market evolution. So that's going to be the end of the show. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.